Every parent has a moment they replay forever. This was hers. The golden retriever's name was Bruno, and he had been with the Marco family for 3 years before Valentina stopped dismissing what he was doing. She was an architect. She thought this mattered. It would turn out that her professional knowledge was exactly what delayed her understanding Marco. And Valentina had Nico, who was 14 months and had recently learned to point at things as a method of requesting them. She pointed at Bruno constantly. He bore this with the patience of an animal who had already decided that Nico was the most important thing in the building. The behavior started on a Tuesday. Nothing obvious. Bruno began positioning himself between Nico and a specific area of the house. Not aggressively, not anxiously. Simply with the calm, particular resolve of an animal executing a task that required no audience approval. He would stand there. He would wait. If Nico moved toward the area, he moved with her. If she reached for something, he was already there. Valentina moved him the first time. He returned before she'd crossed the room. She moved him the second time with greater deliberateness. He returned in under 4 minutes. By the third day, she'd begun consulting her architect colleagues about canine resource guarding. The wrong question. Arriving from the wrong framework, producing entirely wrong conclusions. Her expertise was the problem. She had a category for what she was observing. The category was incorrect. Marco was less certain. He had no professional framework to apply, which meant he was watching what was actually happening instead of watching for confirmation of what he already thought was happening. He mentioned it to his brother. His brother said he'd heard of something like this. Marco said he'd heard of it too. Neither of them said the thing out loud because it sounded like the kind of thing you didn't say until you had proof. On the 7th night, Valentina sat on the kitchen floor at 11 p.m. with her back against the refrigerator, watching Bruno maintain his position near the area he'd been attending to all week. She had a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. She had her phone with a browser open to a veterinary behavior website she wasn't reading. She was watching the dog. He turned and looked at her once. Directly, the kind of look that carries information. Then he turned back. 2 days later, the thing happened. The details are specific, which is why they matter. Bruno began a behavior he had never exhibited in 3 years. He moved from his position and pressed himself against Marco's legs repeatedly in the direction of the phone that was sitting on the counter. Marco reached for it. Bruno continued pressing toward it. Marco called the number he needed to call. What the neurologist found was pre-seizure neurological changes. The neurologist explained the science afterward. Dogs can detect the electrical discharge pattern preceding a grand mal seizure. The window between detectable and symptomatic, in this specific case, was the window in which Bruno had been standing in exactly that spot, in exactly that position, for exactly that many days. He would have seized within 20 minutes without intervention, the neurologist said. Valentina wrote it down, not because she needed to. She would remember it without writing, but because she needed to do something with her hands in that moment. She had a category now. The category was, I had a professional framework that was wrong. The dog had no professional framework and was right. This is not an abstract thing. The family went through the math together later. The number of days, the progression of what had been building, the window they'd had. Bruno had started attending to the situation before any instrument would have detected it, before any symptom would have been visible, before any human sense would have registered anything is wrong. He was working from a different dataset. The family modified the house. They had the inspection. They followed the protocol. They thanked everyone they were supposed to thank. What they couldn't do was fully account for Bruno's contribution in any of the official paperwork. There wasn't a field for it. There isn't a field for it. The neurologist put early detection in the report. Early detection is accurate. It is also incomplete. Valentina sits differently on the kitchen floor now. Differently than she sat in the beginning of this story. Lower, more settled, with Bruno beside her instead of across the room from her. She had 20 years of professional training. She had a dog who'd been paying attention to things she didn't have instruments to measure. She doesn't say she was wrong. She says she was working with incomplete data. Bruno has no opinion on the distinction. He is busy attending to Nico, who is 14 months and has recently learned that pointing at the dog works somewhat better than pointing at most other things. He is patient with her about it. He has always been patient. Has your dog ever done something that didn't make sense? Until suddenly it did. Tell us in the comments. Subscribe so the next story finds you before the noise does. The family did not make a sign or post a notice or tell the story more than necessary in the weeks that followed. What they did was watch the dog differently, not with more suspicion, with more attention. The attention you give something when you understand it's been paying attention to you for longer than you realized. That shift costs nothing and changes everything.